Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Welcome back to On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norman Leahy, senior editor at Ballotpedia. Today we're going to talk about members of Congress retiring. Well, sort of retiring. Some are looking for other employment in Congress or even back home. Joining me to talk about this topic, which, let's be honest, it's a moving target, talking about these issues, is Jeffrey Skelly. For those of you who follow politics closely, you probably remember him as a senior analyst at 538. And for those of us who cover state politics, we had to read everything that he wrote because otherwise you wouldn't know what was going on when he was with Sabato's Crystal Ball. Now, Jeffrey does one of the coolest things that you'll ever hear about. Is the force behind the National Bear Garden Substack. Jeffrey, thanks for joining us on the Ballot. And I want you to give me the elevator pitch on the name National Bear Garden. Where does it come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little in the weeds for people maybe, but I discovered that this was a nickname that was used to describe
Yeah.
the U.S. House of Representatives and sometimes Congress more broadly in the late 19th century or even mid 19th century. And essentially, there used to be basically what a different time, right? They used to have basically like bears fight each other, and so they then kind of took this thing that existed and applied it the term bear garden, the idea of sort of two forces sort of clashing with each other, fighting with each other, being rambunctious and angry with each other. And the press would often use that as basically an epithet, I guess, to describe what was going on in Washington.
What was it? Mark Twain called Congress our only native criminal class. So you chose wisely. You chose wisely. But we're going to talk about the Congress critters, whatever we may think of them these days, in a different perspective because they are people too, believe it or not. And some of them decide, I think I might like to have another job, and that leads to retirements. But when we talk about congressional retirements, particularly where we're talking about members of the House of Representatives, they're not necessarily interested in leaving Congress. Look at you've done some of it as a data scientist on politics. You've looked at some of the numbers. What are we looking at for a head count of people looking to either leave, move up, or move on right now?
Right. So on the House side, it appears right now, and as you said earlier, this is a little bit of a moving target. You've got more or less 15 House members who said they're not seeking reelection, but 14 of those are running for another office. Right now, the only sort of pure retirement, someone who is not running for something else, is Jan Schakowsky from Illinois. So obviously, those House departures, a lot of that is people. It's basically half are running for the U.S. Senate and half are running for governor. So what's going on in terms of the Senate retirements also helped influence this, where you've got 6 U.S. senators who said that they're not seeking reelection in 2026. 5 are retiring, and 1, Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, has said he's going to run for governor there. Shifting gears from Washington to Montgomery. So the retirements in the Senate in particular have drawn some of those House members who are looking to move up. You might have a Haley Stevens in Michigan who's running now for the seat being abandoned by Democratic incumbent Gary Peters, or Chris Pappas, another Democrat who's running for the Senate in New Hampshire, or Andy Barr in Kentucky, because Mitch McConnell's retiring. Andy Barr, Republican, there is running for Senate. So it's a lot of musical chairs, you might say, or maybe it's musical chairs of sort of different platforms of height, because obviously the Senate is considered higher up, so they're trying to race up the stairs and find their seat.
Well, and certainly senators think of themselves as above the House. I think that goes for many state legislatures too. Have any of these retirements surprised you? Has any of these people looking to either move up or move out surprised you at all?
I would say that really the only surprises are maybe Gary Peters retiring from the Senate. It's interesting because he's not in Senate terms, especially. He's not particularly ancient by any means. Some people have hung around there a very long time until they're
Yes.
quite old. So at the same time, he obviously was Michigan being a state that Donald Trump nearly carried in the 2024 presidential election. even if Democrats have a better cycle because there's a Republican in the White House for a midterm, which the party that's not in the White House tends to have a better midterm election. Peters was probably going to have a tough reelection battle. And if your heart's not in it, in that fight, raising the money, making that kind of battle, or if you just have decided maybe 2 terms is all I wanted in the first place, he's finishing off his second term. Different people have different motivations. So that was a little surprising, though. But I think it is telling that he made that announcement so early because he knows he and other politicians in his position who have decided they don't want to run again or are leaning that way will say, well, I need to make an early decision, particularly for a statewide race, because I need the successor candidates from my party to be able to have time to raise money, gather support, organize their campaigns. So particularly on the Senate side, you see very early retirements these days for the most part. There are exceptions to that. But for the most part, in order to give their party sort of the maximum amount of time to raise money and get organized, senators tend to retire pretty early, which I think explains in part why we have 6 already on the Senate side, and there might be a couple more before all things are done, but I suspect that's most of the retirements we're going to see in the Senate. Whereas on the House side, a lot of the action hasn't happened yet, I suspect.
Okay.
We'll probably see things happening a lot later on.
Because that was my next question. We're still early in the prep, doing all the prep work for the 2026 midterm elections. And, there it looks like there's a fair number of members of House who are just making other plans, but we might be able to expect a lot more between now and, say, what, January of next year?
Right. As actually, Ballotpedia has helpfully put together a lot of this data. I, in the past, have put together a lot of this data, but you tend to see more retirements as you get sort of around the holidays, you might say, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, into January, as members of Congress, the House, mainly is what we're talking about here, are looking at the environment and wondering, wonder if I actually would be in trouble about, in terms of winning re-election, or my party might lose power. Do I really want to hang around for 2 more years, or try to hang around even if I have a good chance of winning? So you'll see people retiring from even safe seats for their party because they figure, I don't really want to be in the minority for 2 years, especially for older members who may have been around for a bit. So these are the kinds of decisions that will come down the pike, and we're still a little ways from that. I think it's a situation where I should mention that the other sort of lurking variable in all this, I wanted to make a point about this, is the candidate filing deadline in each state. So with the Schakowsky retirement being the one sort of true retirement, pure retirement we've seen so far, someone who's not running for another office. Well, Illinois has one of the earliest candidate filing deadlines, December 1st, if I'm not mistaken, for 2026. It's December 1st, 2025 for their March primary. Texas also is very early. It's in December as well. It's filing deadline for a March primary. And so you're more likely to see those kinds of decisions, people deciding they don't want to run again in those states earliest. Whereas a state like, I don't know, New York, their primary is in June of 2026. Their filing deadline's in early April. So you're not going to maybe see some sort of final decisions on that until a little bit later on. And even there's some states with August primaries that have filing deadlines in June, like I think Wisconsin is an example of that. So that's another part of this. But if you're just sort of thinking about the overall picture, a lot of it is, oh, let's see where the environment is in a few months, and that will weigh heavily on the decisions of most members because only a few states have super early filing deadlines.
Right, but for for our listeners who may be playing along at home and keeping their own scorecards, filing deadlines are an indicator of when announcements may come. So that's keep an eye on that. But also, you talk about the environment, and as we know, the environment in Washington and in the country and in districts changes frequently. And so, what we think may be the environment today may not be even next week. It can change that substantially. And you talk about the things that really influence people. I think, well, gee, what about, is there going to be a wave election next year? Am I going to get a big primary challenge? Yeah, among all the things that you look at and weight, which one do you weight most heavily? Is it the difficulty possibly of a primary challenge? Is it the idea that the other side's just gonna be stronger because it's a midterm? Well, I mean, what do you think is the biggest thing to look out for?
Yeah, again, this gets back sort of to the case by case basis for candidates, but I think if you're looking at seats that are sort of are baseline competitive,
Hmm.
so seats that even if one candidate carried it in like the last presidential election, we spent a lot of time looking at the presidential numbers by congressional districts. So take a Don Bacon or something in Nebraska's
Hmm.
second congressional district. That's the bluest seat that a Republican holds, the most Democratic leaning. Kamala Harris carried it by almost 5 percentage points. And Don Bacon, there has been some chatter that he might choose to retire. A Republican member holding a seat like that, Democrats immediately would view it as, I mean, they already view it probably as one of their top takeover opportunities in a midterm environment. And Bacon may decide, I don't want to defend. I've defended this seat in some tough environments and held on to it. I don't want to do it again. And that could also depend, though, on whereas President Trump's approval rating come, later, December, January, that ahead here is Trump actually in a somewhat stronger position than where he currently is? His approval rating is underwater right now, but it's not dramatically underwater. But if it were to fall and stay low in like the 40% territory, I think right now it's in the mid 40s. If it were to fall to like 40%, you might see some candidates or some incumbents in seats that are, Trump carried in the last presidential election, but are marginal enough that those members might say, "Oof, I might actually have more trouble here." Conversely, in a super safe seat for one party, it could come down to things like, "Oh, I've frustrated my party, so I might get a primary challenge." So it is very much, I think, a kind of a case by case basis.
But how many of those marginal competitive House districts, for example, how many of those still exist?
Not many. Actually, I was looking at the data before we chatted here, and I was just like, okay, thinking about if Democrats are probably in an advantageous position for a midterm election with a Republican in the White House who's not terribly popular. In terms of what are Democratic targets, it's like, oh, let's look at some seats that Trump carried by sort of 5 points or fewer, or that Kamala Harris carried that Republicans currently hold, and you're only talking about actually 16 seats right now that
Mm.
would fall into that category. Now, I think as anyone who's watched midterm election results before will tell you, there can be surprises. There could be seats that are redder than that. The Democrats could maybe make a play in, depending on just the circumstances in that district and what's going on in maybe a statewide race there. And the local factors, a weak candidate gets nominated in an open primary or something. Every district is going to have some variability, but there is just sort of the larger national picture and how that's going to weigh, uh, broadly speaking, in most places. So but at the same time, I think that does speak the fact that you only have, kind of that range of seats and you could tack on a few more Democratic seats that Harris only narrowly carried, that Democrats hold, and maybe you're talking about 25, 30 seats at most that are sort of in the truly competitive range, and that's out of 435.
Mhm, yeah.
So, the flip side of that is if things got really bad for the Republicans as the party in the White House, the number of seats that could come into play, could expand a great deal because there are a number of seats that are sort of just out of range maybe for Democrats right now, but if Donald Trump were to get particularly unpopular, if we were to see something of the 60-year itch that we've seen for second-term presidents in the past, obviously Trump's in a little bit of a different position as with 2 non-consecutive terms,
Right.
but, George W. Bush in 2006, for instance, would be a recent example. Uh, uh, Basically, an unpopular incumbent president whose party suffers greatly in the second midterm, especially because you might have a number of seats that are marginal. But there aren't as many marginal seats this time as you saw back then. And so I think that makes the playing field smaller. And therefore, I think it's more likely than not that we'll see small shift overall, historically speaking.
Well, we could always go back and check Grover Cleveland's numbers in the
Yes.
second term.
Yes. We don't have much polling from back then.
Oh my god.
We have
What
no
are we gonna
polling.
do? We're
Um,
without the polling day, we're lost. But that's out of all the things that are, so we can see possibly a lot more retirements. There are a lot of factors, a lot of wheels moving here. Do you think do you have any suspicions about who might be looking to make an exit or make a move up?
Yeah, so the Don Bacon example in
Mhm.
Nebraska, I think looms because his seat would so quickly become a top target for Democrats. Another person who I'm watching closely is Mike Lawler. Lawler from New York's 17th congressional district, Republican. There holds the seat, one of the 3 seats that Harris carried that in the 2024 election that Republicans control, very narrowly, to be clear. It's a very competitive district, but it's one where you actually saw Donald Trump endorse Lawler for re-election. But Lawler is considering running for governor and has been for a while in New York, and might have the profile of a New York Republican who could actually make a play for that, even though it's, New York is a Democratic-leaning state. So Lawler might still want to run for governor. Clearly, Trump doesn't want him to because he knows Lawler is kind of his best shot of keeping that seat. So kind of that decision-making and how much pressure the president puts on someone like Lawler to stay where
Right.
he is, that'll be kind of an interesting thing to watch. So those I think are a couple good examples.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. There's so much time before us. It's almost maddening because you want it to happen now. But Jeffrey Skelly, I appreciate you very much joining us here on the ballot, and it's because always illuminating. And I know that we'll have so much time ahead of us. We'll talk again about who's up, who's out, who's looking to move on. But Jeffrey, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Happy to chat again.
And please check out Jeffrey's work at the National Bear Garden, which is just, again, super awesome name. And it doesn't matter how niche it is. That is, if you're a political junkie, you just get that. You've got the itch right now, and you've got to go check it out. But I'm Norm Leahy, your host here of On the Ballot. We'll be with you again soon with another episode. Until then, check us out on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And until then, we'll see you on the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.